Welcome everyone. Connect with the campaign for grade level. Welcome everyone. Connect with the campaign for grade level reading on social media. On YouTube, subscribe to @grade level reading. On Facebook and Instagram, like the pages Campaign for CGLR. On Twitter, you can follow us at Reading by Third, and on LinkedIn, follow us at Campaign for GLR. Once again, welcome everyone. My name is Leah Cruz, and I will be working behind the scenes today to help facilitate this conversation. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge our enterprise and programmatic funders, as well as our individual donors. And a special thank you to our growing circle of sustaining LEO sponsors, so learning and engagement opportunities. Your support not only allows us to hold these vital conversations, but it also helps us create meaningful opportunities to share insights, foster connections, and build the CGLR community. So thank you. And then we do have a few housekeeping tips before we get started. First, we would love for you to introduce yourself. So please use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to share your name, city or state, or your organization. Be sure to select everyone when typing in the chat so that we all know who is here. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but we encourage you to engage through the chat box and by posting questions in the Q&A. We will dedicate some different portions of the webinar to the Q&A, and participants will also be able to see any answers that our panelists type out there as well. The webinar is being recorded and live streamed. A link to the recording, as well as any slides, bios, resources, everything that we talk about during the webinar will be shared not only in the chat today, but also in a follow-up email to everyone who is registered. And lastly, we will be having a brief on-screen evaluation during Q&A, and we highly encourage you to respond. This helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement. And then last thing from me before I turn it over is we do want to go over some of our upcoming webinar opportunities. So the links for these to register will be dropped in the chat. But we have next week a co-sponsored event with Children in Screens about this during the first 5 years, what we need to know and what to do. So that has a lot of very practical information about technology in those earliest years and how to utilize it and what to do and not to do. Then we also have our continuation of our Parents as Curators series the following Tuesday, and that is about homeschooling and kind of where the evolution of that is right now. We have a partner webinar on the 28th that is in a continuation of our early relational health discussion with Nurture Connection. So that will be on the 28th at 3 p.m. And then on the 4th, we have a Crucible of Practice Salon at 12:30. And that one is about the Reading Captains program. Right. And with that, so be sure to register for those. And with that, I will turn it over to Michelle, who is let me switch to, here we go, to introduce Michelle. She is a senior consultant with us at the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, but she also works with Book Harvest, and she's going to lead us in this discussion today. So, Michelle.
Thanks, Leah. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. So we're thrilled that you can join us for today's Learning Tuesdays conversation held during National Book Month and Banned Books Week Fest. So it's the perfect moment to reflect on the power of books to transform children's lives. So when we talk about book abundance, it's not just about having enough books, but ensuring every child grows up surrounded by stories that both reflect who they are and invite them to imagine who they can become. Decades of research affirms what many of us see every day. When families have access to books and share them regularly, children's language, curiosity, and confidence grows. But the types of books matters too. Diverse and representative stories shape how children see themselves, others, and their place in the world, nurturing identity, belonging, and the joy that fuels lifelong literacy. Today, we'll explore how ensuring children's abundant access to representative, engaging books lays the foundation for literacy, school readiness, and a lifelong love of reading. So today's panelists bring perspectives from research to community practice to family engagement, and together they will help us see what happens when book abundance moves from theory to reality, when children and families are surrounded by rich, resonant stories that make reading both joyful and transformative. So I'd now like to invite our panelists to join us on the Zoom stage so you can meet them. Their full bios are linked in the chat. And so joining us today, we have Jules Appleton, who's the Director of Research and Insights at First Book, Tabitha Blackwell, Executive Director of Book Harvest Durham, Rebecca Crystal, Managing Director of Programs at Raising a Reader, Rebecca Slavey, Executive Director at AmazeWorks, and Cinnamon Woodbury, Senior Program Director, Make Way for Books. So as we begin this next segment, I really want us to hold in view both the promise of book abundance and some stark trends that we are up against. So a recent study from the University of Florida and University of College London found that daily reading for pleasure in the US has declined by more than 40% over the past 2 decades. That's a sustained drop of about 3% per year. And what's especially concerning about this is that this decline is not evenly distributed. Steeper drops were observed among Black Americans, those with lower income or education levels, and people in rural areas, deepening long-standing disparities. So this gap is meaningful. When reading for enjoyment is shrinking, its ripple effects reach into how children see reading, how much choice and time families feel they have, and how much society values books and reading in general. So in other words, the context in which we are advocating for book abundance is one in which the culture of reading is under stress. It makes our work more urgent, not less. And book abundance is more than a distribution challenge. It's a cultural, relational, and equity challenge. It's about ensuring children and families are surrounded by books that reflect their lives, open new vistas, invite reading as a pleasure and not just as a task. So here's how we'll flow today. First, we're going to start with our panelists providing some opening remarks about the great work that they're doing and some evidence behind that. We'll then have a moderated discussion and then finally time for Q&A. So to ground our conversation, we're going to start with each panelist sharing a bit about how their work promotes and or takes advantage of book abundance, and then they will share what evidence tells us about the power of books, how access to books, especially diverse and representative ones, can support early literacy success and early relational health, help children's racial identity and sense of belonging, and spark a lifelong love of reading. So each of our panelists bring a unique lens to this work. So as you listen, think about the connections between literacy, identity, and belonging, and how book abundance can make those connections even stronger. So we'll start with Jules.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, Michelle. It's really great to be here with all of you. I care so much about this topic, and I love being in a room full of other people that really care about this topic. I feel right at home with my people, and I can't wait to learn from everyone else here too. So for those of you who may not know, First Book is a national nonprofit that furthers educational opportunities for children ages 0 to 18 who are growing up in low-income communities. So a central part of our work is focused on book abundance. That's increasing access to high quality, relevant books and making those books affordable to the kids and families that need them most. So our approach to this is really to fostering book abundance is to listen to what is needed by the educator members that we work with. So we serve over 600,000 educator members, and they take roles anywhere from classroom teachers to volunteers to program leaders, really any adult that is dedicated to serving children in low-income communities every day. And we believe these adults working directly with kids know best what books will get those kids reading. So we use our dedicated research arm, First Book Research and Insights, to identify the books that educators need for their kids and then deliver those books through our nonprofit site called the First Book Marketplace. And educators can go on the First Book Marketplace and select from a wide range of titles. We have both donated inventory from publishers as well as titles that First Book purchases directly from publishers, and this is done through our professional curation team to ensure that we really are bringing the highest quality early childhood titles and children's titles to the market. We also have what we call accelerator resources, which are free downloadable support guides that we develop in partnership with leading experts to help educators address certain challenges that we know they're all facing when they're working with kids in need. So those resources, they're little downloadable one-pagers, and they're free on the marketplace. So from that's a bit about what First Book does and how we're working in this space. From a research lens, I will have much more to say about book abundance and belonging and literacy success later in the session, because we did conduct a study on just that topic. So I will highlight that in a little more detail later. Okay, so from a research perspective, First Book has been studying the benefits of book abundance and access to quality books, specifically in low-income communities for years, right? And our most successful top study to date has been called the Diverse Books Impact Study. So that's what I'm going to talk about real quickly right now. And that was conducted during the 2022 and 2023 school year. So I have a few slides to show you some of the highlights we learned from that study that really speak to how diverse books can create a sense of belonging and ultimately improve early literacy and success. So the study was designed with 3 objectives in mind. That was 1, to better understand the impact of a diverse classroom library from the educator perspective. 2, to better understand a diverse classroom library with respect to student outcomes. And then 3, to add to the very limited research that actually exists on this topic. So First Book is actually, in fact, still looking for funding to continue this study in future phases. This is research that we think is so important for the field, so important for us to understand how to foster identity and a love of reading among kids. Okay, so just a really quick overview of how this study ran so you can have an idea of what the key findings really mean. Essentially, we gave over 400 classroom-based teachers $250 to purchase diverse books for their class. So the books that they believed would be the most reflective of and engaging for their students. And then participants were required to report on various key impact measurements throughout the course of about 6 months, right? So what were reading scores like? What was classroom engagement like in general? How much time was spent reading? And you can see on this slide real quickly that we had such a strong response from our network. We had over 3,600 educators raise their hand to say, please let me participate in this study, which really just illustrates how important educators know diverse books are for the kids they are serving. In this situation, specifically the educators serving low-income students who often don't have access to quality books and sometimes don't have access to any books outside of the classroom, let alone representative ones. So next slide, real quickly. Okay, so what did we learn after educators spent roughly 6 months with these new books? We saw students' reading scores increased after educators added these books to their classrooms. We saw that bilingual and LGBTQ+ titles drove the largest gains. Students also spent more time reading after educators added these books to their classroom libraries. And we saw that allowing students to choose which books they want to read really positively affects outcomes, and the majority of students choose to read diverse books that serve as mirrors where they can see themselves. So now I know I'm coming close on time, so now I really just want to highlight 2 of the most important findings in a little bit more detail really quickly. So particularly, these are the findings that most demonstrate how book abundance positively impacts learning, particularly the benefits of having access to an abundance of books that reflect your students' lived experiences. So very first promising key finding from this study was that just 5 months after the infusion of diverse books into the classroom, the average amount of classroom reading time increased by 4 hours per week. So this means that just the addition of approximately 48 new diverse titles, because that was the average number of books educators could get with their $250, added 4 hours of collective reading each week to the classroom. Next slide, thank you. And then beyond just reading engagement, reading scores also improved for our participants. So at each bi-monthly survey time point, educators reported gains in reading assessment scores. You can see that in this chart to the right. Now you might be thinking, of course, you would expect to see gains in any classroom, right? That scores are going to improve regardless of the infusion of new books. But what's interesting is that the amount scores improved for our participants was far higher than the nationally expected yearly gains. So the NCES, the National Center for Education Statistics, they report an average gain of about 6 points in reading scores for a given year. Our participants saw gains of 9 points by the end of the study, so 3 points higher than the national average. And even more exciting was that those gains were greatest for the lowest scoring students. So those students that stood to improve the most did. And I really think both of these findings, seeing an increase in time spent reading and an increase in reading scores, really start to just illustrate how a child's love of and success with reading can grow when they have the right books in front of them. So that's a little bit about how First Book is tackling the space. I hope I stayed within time. But yep, that's my last slide. Thanks.
You did stay within time. Thanks, Jules. And such powerful data. And I encourage everyone to dive deep into, there's the full report, but really just it's so powerful to see how diverse books can not only increase the amount of time children are reading, but how those reading scores really did increase and that even higher than what was at the national average. So thank you, Jules. I will hand it over now to Tabitha.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Tabitha Blackwell, and I'm Executive Director of Book Harvest Durham. At Book Harvest, our work is fundamentally guided by our vision. Next slide, please. We're based right here in Durham. Next slide. And our big vision and mission is books for every child, support for every parent, and literacy for every community. We believe deeply in literacy and justice for all, and we're dreaming of a world where children are surrounded by books and equipped for success. Next slide. While Book Harvest National really works to advance and broaden this vision, Book Harvest Durham is our flagship community where the organization was founded. And Book Harvest Durham focuses on our local families and creating a community of literacy-rich programs. And so while we have an array of different programs, for us, abundance means ensuring access driven by the belief that all children have the right to own books from birth. And so we really focus in on the first decade of life for children and families, and our families that really create once again, going back to that community of literacy-rich programming. We have a continuum of programs that seek to reach a wide range of families in community. Our book hubs have really been an amazing way for us to provide books in indoor bookshelves, in clinics, laundromats, all the way to outdoor spaces, to outdoor book boxes that are in parks and in spaces like schools that are high traffic venues where families are spending their time and really meeting families where they are. And we recently installed our 100th book box, and to date, Book Harvest has harvested over 2.8 million books. And I'll go back for a minute to the slide previous to this and note that book last year, beautiful, you can see there. Last year here in Durham, the mayor proclaimed Durham the city of books. And that was hugely because one of our tenures is not just having quality programming, but really getting it and making sure that it's reaching those families that are not maybe coming into our space or able to actually come to our family space locally. And next slide, that takes us to our family space. And so I really wanted to give a visual of what book abundance and what diversity in our diverse books look like and why that impact is so important to us. And so our family space has provided an intentional and playful learning space for the community, and the impact of this literacy-rich environment with toys, with cozy corners, has really been a magnet for families to not only want to engage with us, but to remain and stay engaged and to get a really diverse group of folks that are coming into the space and engaging with us. And so, whereas 2 years ago we had around 230 children that would be coming into the space every month, we now, since we've really started implementing a lot of bilingual story times, and our team, the family and community engagement team, has been doing such a great job with really engaging with families, working with our family advisory board to just affirm that representation really does matter and that we want to make sure that we are representative of the community of Durham that we serve. And so our diverse book collections that we have in our family space, as well as the bilingual story times, and once a month, we have all Spanish story times in that space, are not only serving as mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors for those families and reflecting those students, those children identities, but also offering insights into other experiences. And really reflective of probably the 20% of families in Durham that do not have English as their first language. And so I give that sort of as our example of one of the many programs that we have, that all of them really infusing this mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors foundational belief that Book Harvest has. And so I really look forward to this conversation and diving deeper into our learnings, tapping into the data, and also tapping into the wonderful families that we have here in Durham. And with that, I will pass it over to Michelle.
Thanks, Tabitha. I love that the mayor proclaimed Durham the city of books. How cool is that? So amazing. All right, thanks, Tabitha. And Rebecca Crystal with Raising a Reader.
Thanks, Michelle. Hi, everyone. My name's Rebecca Crystal. I'm the Managing Director of Programs for Raising a Reader. Raising a Reader is a national family engagement and early literacy nonprofit that supports families and inspires the development of reading skills and a lifelong love for reading to help children attain brighter futures. Next slide, please. Our work is grounded in the belief that book abundance, the consistent presence of high-quality, multicultural, diverse books in children's lives, is essential to building lifelong readers. We know that shared reading is one of the most effective ways to support early literacy and reading development, as well as fostering this genuine love of reading. Too often, families, especially those in underserved communities, face book deserts where affordable, accessible, engaging, or culturally relevant books are scarce. Next slide, please. Our classic Red Book Bag program addresses this directly by circulating books into children's homes each week, ensuring that every child has access to a wide variety of titles throughout the year. On average, children in our program are exposed to over 100 books annually, a number that far exceeds what most families may otherwise have access to. The collections intentionally include books that affirm children's identities, their languages, and cultures, while introducing them to perspectives and stories from around the globe. Next slide, please. Thank you. The impact of this abundance is pretty profound. We see children and families gain interest and motivation for reading. Last year, our families increased the frequency and duration of book sharing time by over 125%. 94% of our families reported an increase in their child's interest in reading, and 90% of families established a book sharing routine that were enrolled in Raising a Reader. Over 25 years of evaluations also demonstrate gains in early literacy skills and kindergarten readiness. So just as importantly, though, families are reporting a deep sense of connection through the shared experience of reading together. And caregivers who may have previously felt unequipped or unsupported in reading with their children gain both the tools and confidence to make reading joyful. After participating in Raising a Reader last year, about 93% of our families surveyed felt confident in supporting their child's learning. That's an increase of over 30%. Ultimately, book abundance is not just about quantity for Raising a Reader, but it's also about representation and choice. When children consistently see themselves reflected in books, they feel valued. They feel like I'm important too. Raising a Reader models make that kind of abundance of books, not just for a few families, but for entire communities. Thanks, Michelle.
Such powerful data, such powerful findings that 94% of families reported increase in their child's interest in reading. So now we will hand this over to the other Rebecca.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rebecca Slaby. I use she, her pronouns. I am the executive director at AmazeWorks. We're based in Minnesota. And you can always hear my Minnesota accent whenever I say Minnesota. I always like to start with self and identity, because I think that's really important to share a little bit about myself and where I come from. Because that is what I actually think that what we're trying to do with Book Abundance and representation through diverse books is help affirm the identities and lived experiences of children and frankly all of us. And so a little bit about myself. I'm a Korean adoptee, raised in a white family. I'm a mother of two adolescents, or one's a young adult now. I am married. I live on Dakota land in Minneapolis. I honor my Korean ancestors, even though I don't actually know who they are. I was a middle school teacher for 15 years, and I have been at AmazeWorks now for about 8 years. So that's a little bit about myself. And at AmazeWorks, we are about championing equity and belonging for all. And what does that mean? We've been around for 30 years. We were started in a Minneapolis public school because a little girl had a hate message come home in the form of a birthday card. And it said, "I hate you, girl lover," because she had 2 lesbian moms. And the school community rallied together and turned it into a teachable moment. And it was about how is it that we can use picture books and storytelling to expose children to different family structures and also affirm the diverse family structures that are in the school community. And that is where our signature curriculum, which is all book-based, was born. And we are not just about providing representation through books. We also have persona dolls in early childhood. Our middle school curriculum is video-based, actually, because, well, middle schoolers. But we are about helping educators navigate those challenging conversations with children starting at a very young age on identity, difference, and bias. And so our work is really about providing the curriculum resources, the lessons, the discussion guides that go along with the diverse resources, the diverse books, because kids say the darndest things, and we as adults are not very well versed, as you can see with the culture and climate we are living in right now. We are not very well versed at having hard conversations, brave conversations around identity, around differences. And we can do better for our children. And research shows that having as few as 5 explicit conversations about race and other differences actually lowers bias levels in children. And you can have those conversations through picture books. And so that is the power of picture books. And educators and caregivers and librarians and community members, they need some more resources and support to have those conversations. So what are the discussion questions? What's maybe some background information about the identity, the lived experience, the history that's embedded in a story that you may not know and understand? What are follow-up activities, right? That's the kind of curricular resources that we can provide. And then we do a lot of professional development, a lot of workshops with parents and caregivers and families. So we try to do more comprehensive approach with support, because we know that as much as we want to put books in the hands of children, we also need support to support the adults around having those conversations. And so that's what we do at Amaze Works.
Thanks, Rebecca. I love how you started and grounded us in identity, and look forward to diving deeper on that topic of identity and belonging with you a little bit later. And then also just the story that you shared in the beginning about the school and that the courage that they had to start having these brave conversations is something that I am inspired by, and hope that more places have that courage to continue to have those kinds of conversations. So thanks, Rebecca. Cinnamon, I'll hand it over to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cinnamon Woodbury. I am the Senior Program Director for Story Project, a program grounded at the Make Way for Books. We are located in Arizona, and we serve 9 counties. We've served 9 counties across the state in the last 2 years. And I'm here to talk to you about our services and what we do. So Make Way for Books was founded on the idea of book abundance. We have a beautiful founder who went into a classroom 27 years ago, and she had a background in literacy and education, and they had no books. And she thought, well, how do you teach children how to read if you have no books, if they have no tools or materials to do this. So in our two programs, the Story Project is a professional development and a coaching program, and Story School is a family education program that's truly 2Gen. And when I say that, I mean that the parents get the books in their hands while we teach the literacy skill. And both these programs focus on 5 core literacy skills, and we root our work in research. We understand that early literacy development is key development for children's life. So we're talking about vocabulary, listening, speaking, understanding sounds, singing songs, enjoying stories. We want to lay the foundation for lifelong learning. We know these skills develop through everyday interactions with adults in children's lives. And so we recognize that not all families, not all educators, not all systems have access to the same materials and opportunities in our state. And we've worked with other systems in our state to really ground our work in the educational system, in spaces where families are and educators are. So we prioritize that. And in our programs, we've found them to be effective. We've found that educators feel more confident. 80% of educators feel more confident in asking questions during story times, and not just reading stories at children. When teachers participate in our program, 75% of them are using our reading model in 6 or more reading opportunities in the week. We want these books to be in the hands of children, and with an educator and a supportive adult that knows how to read these books. Everyone that participates in our program also, because we're talking about book abundance, receives books to take home. This picture is actually from when I was coaching during COVID, and we were doing book deliveries at people's doorsteps with bags of beautiful book selections. The educators got 35 books for their classrooms. Every child that participates in our program gets a book to take home to start their library, and all families that participate in our family education programming receive 22 books to start their at-home library with their families. And just a couple really beautiful quotes. We don't just want to give books without the support, because that doesn't necessarily make a meaningful change, long-lasting change, sustainable change. So when we leave the space, the books it's helpful when we give them the tools and skills to use them. So we hear educators saying that they've learned different tactics to use books, that they can incorporate different cultures and differences because the books look like the children's we serve. So our communities that we serve have different book collections. When we are on Indigenous lands, we give out Indigenous books by authors that represent those tribal lands. When we're working with Spanish-speaking home providers, those Spanish-speaking home providers get books in Spanish. When children are refugee children and they speak Farsi or Mandarin, they can request those languages. We select Braille books for children. We want children to see themselves represented in the books. It's important to know that you're represented in the learning materials in your classroom. And this data came from one of our grants that was a national grant through a Child Development Block Grant. So many states have this grant. This is one of the data pieces that I thought was really cool to share with you today. And after participating in our program, the educators in their last survey said these are the different types of books, because we also know children need access to different types of books, different ways to see characters, to use books as tools, so not just as a narrative. And that's kind of the way we tackle book abundance. And I'm so excited to share more with all of you as we talk more.
Thank you, Cinnamon. So I know several of the orgs work directly with educators, so I love how you elevated some of this educator data, because one of the things, there are some studies that show that who are families' most trusted resources for advice, and educator and pediatricians are the top 2 that always come up. And so being able to provide educators the tools and resources on how to work with families can really foster that connection too, and that Yeah, and that just that integration and the connection between home and school. So thank you so much for that. So thank you to everybody for grounding us in your work and the evidence behind the power of book abundance. So now we're going to move into a conversation, so a dialogue that really connects those ideas. So I'm hoping that all of you can come onto the screen, and we're going to explore how book abundance shows up in practice across different contexts, from early literacy and achievement and access to representation to belonging and joy. So let's start with early literacy and achievement. And I'm going to ask Jules, because I know for me, it takes me, there's that saying that you need to hear something 7 times before it actually gets drilled into you. Jules, can you just share some of that data that you shared earlier, and then maybe a few other points? That'd be great.
Yeah, sure. So I've already mentioned some of our most exciting key findings from the Diverse Books study that really show that book abundance does promote reading achievement. So we saw that reading time increase by 4 hours collectively in each classroom. And then we saw reading scores increased 3 points above the nationally expected average gain. So those are really awesome findings. But other things we learned that really drill this point home, the point that it's representation and reflectiveness of these books that really creates the impact, is that our reading scores improved the most for those classrooms that received bilingual and LGBTQ+ books. So for every one additional bilingual book that educators in our study added to their classroom library, student reading assessment scores improved by 7 points on average. And then for every one LGBTQ+ book that educators added to their classroom library, student reading assessment scores improved by 4.5 points on average. So really saw here that specific book types really drive improved reading skills. They make kids want to pick up that book, they feel seen by that book, and they want to learn more. So just wanted to add a little more detail on those. And I'll take a quick minute to answer a question from the Q&A that I saw come in. So someone asked a really great question about have we followed up with these participants that received an abundance of diverse books for this study for a whole year? And the short and somewhat sad answer is no, we have not yet, because I'm sure, as many of you know, we are on a search for funding. Funding for this research is rare and limited, and but it is one of our main goals to rerun this study and not only include past participants, a certain percentage of past participants, but we also want to be able to address some other limitations that we definitely face with this study. So looking to run another phase to include those past participants, to make it longer, make it a whole school year instead of 1 year. We want to get a control group in there. So what's the big difference between adding a diverse book versus just any brand new book? So a lot more work to do with this study, and really appreciate all the questions, and we really hope to address them soon in the future.
Thanks, Jules, and thanks for elaborating on some of that data and some of those key points. Cinnamon, I know you started sharing some of the data that you had. Do you have anything else that you want to share around early literacy and achievement?
Yeah, what we know as Make Way for Books, and I saw a question in the chat that I might answer right now as well, that educators need about 3 years to input and really own curriculum change. And so what we're working on is not just, like Jules was saying, we need the funding to do this work ongoing. It's important that educators have support. One of the biggest costs to education systems is teacher turnover, and professional development that's high quality and accessible and virtual, or has micro learnings and materials and resources that teachers can come back to, are crucial to make teachers feel like, and not just feel like, be able to really do this work on a long-term basis, and to have admin systems that are bought in. So it's not just working with the teachers and the educators, it's also talking to the administration systems, if that's a school district, if that's superintendents, if that's the owner of the childcare systems, because as we know, early childhood education is not K-12 in the same way. It's not like, here's the school district and here's the children and here's how it goes. Those people need to be at the table and a part of the literacy development plan. And someone in the Q&A asked about the Arizona Literacy Development Plan. So that has been created and developed by an entity called Read On Arizona, with several partners, Make Way for Books, United Way of Southern Arizona, Valley of the Sun United Way, Helios Education Foundation, Virginia Piper, lots of Arizona facilities, as well as they have a partnership, a learning fellowship with Florida and their educational partnerships. And they've worked to look at the data, the COVID data and the previous data, to look at what spaces can we do specific strategic work with educators, families, systems to make, thank you for putting it in the chat, to make a difference in the lives of children in Arizona, because the sad fact is most of our children are not reading on grade level in Arizona. And I can imagine anyone who's here nationally, the same is probably true for the students in your state. And when we think about this third grade reading score, we know that children go from reading to learn to learning to read, from learning to read to reading to learn. And that's why book abundance and having books that look like the students we're serving really make a difference, because children who see themselves reflected in the materials, the people that teach them, feel safe to learn. A favorite quote I have from an educator is, people don't learn from people they don't like. And educators want to learn from an educator they like. Children want to learn from teachers that want to be teachers and want to be in the classroom and want to teach and want to read books that are aligned to the children's interests and the children's experiences. So in Arizona, that's not a book about snowstorms. Maybe it's about cactuses and hiking and stuff like that. So yeah, that's some general data about that.
Thanks, Cinnamon. And Rebecca, I know Raising a Reader also works with parents and educators and systems. Is there anything you want to add to the mix around the data that you're seeing or the work that you do?
Sure.
Absolutely. Thanks, Michelle. So Raising Reader, we work with over 300 partners, and we ultimately serve about 150,000 children across the country every year. And with our model, what we're seeing is that shared reading and the access to high quality, diverse children's books, that's the catalyst for early literacy and language development and reading achievement. So we want this access to books, and we know that when children either own books at home or they have access to books, they're 6 times more likely to read above their expected level compared to kids who don't own books or don't have access to the books. And then when we compound that with books that are meaningful to children and meaningful to families, we see that amongst the families that we surveyed last year, over 73% of families felt that the books that they received from Raising a Reader resonated with their lives in some way, shape, or form. It might be language, it might be their community, it might be their culture, their race, or topics that really just resonated with them as a family. We know that that sense of belonging that families have when they look at these books helps kids, and it motivates them to read. We have kids asking to be read to. Before Raising a Reader, they're asking to be read to maybe a couple times a week. And after Raising a Reader, they're asking to be read to 5, 6, 7 times a week. So that's so powerful when it comes to, just the motivation. And a motivation to read is one of the strongest predictors of reading volume and overall reading achievement. A couple other things is that when we look at research in general, we find that about 77% of kids say that they're more interested in reading when they can find books that reflect who they are. So we're seeing more time reading, more practice reading, and that's in turn, that's leading to vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension. So there's just a lot of data that is pointing to the motivation, that is pointing to increased frequency and duration, that's going to ultimately lead to better readers, more on grade level, and having that sense of belonging that is fostering learning achievement for these kiddos.
Thanks, Rebecca. So I'm going to shift our gears a little bit, tiny bit. As we think about that, book abundance really isn't just about numbers, it's about access too. And it's whether these books are truly available, affordable, and accessible for every family. So if you guys could if everyone could talk about their strategies of how they see working to ensure families, especially those furthest from opportunity, have access to the books that they need. What do you see as helping close those gaps, and what can make book abundance real in every home and community? And Tabitha, I'll start with you, since after all, Durham is the city of books.
Well, thank you. And in listening to everyone, I realized that what immediately came to my mind is the big thing. We've learned that real impact starts with relationships, and that can come in the form of partnerships, in the form of parents reading to their child. But when children and families feel seen, respected, and valued, they engage differently with the books and the joy that they spark. And so we've really, in expecting families a lot of times to come to our program is not the way to really deeply provide access. It's how can we meet families in the places they know and trust, and offering stories that reflect their lives and dreams and ensure that they have real choice in how they fill and what they fill their shelves with. And what makes that's what makes Book Abundance possible. And it's not only the places, as I said, it's the trusted partners and agents who are providing those books to them. So coming into a space and being able to see someone who is bilingual and know that they have maybe some lived experience that's similar to yours, or knowing that the space itself, if it is a space, is safe, or that that particular program is a safe program. For a lot of families, in particular in these times, it is a huge thing on people's minds. And so our programs really need to reflect and celebrate the cultures and languages of the families that we serve. And I talked a little bit about the Durham demographics, with about 20% of families speaking the language other than English, with about 14% of those being Spanish. But we still offer a diverse range of books in various languages that, and actually keep a little, Gia, our coordinator, keeps a little list of all of the languages spoken in Durham, so that, or the top languages spoken in Durham, so that we're able to really address those needs. And so I'd say, you know, going back to that concept of relationship, the gap we see between us and those furthest from the access begins to close when we move beyond just thinking of book access as a simple exchange, and we really embrace it as a shared community promise, and that every child should grow up surrounded by books, and that really help us imagine, connect, and feel a sense of belonging.
I love that, a shared community of promise. I love that phrase. Anyone else want to jump in here? Maybe Jules on this?
Yeah, I'd love to zoom out real quickly and talk about some of the things that First Book does outside of even the research space that really speak to how we're ensuring families, especially the families and kids that need these books most, are getting them. And one of the main things we really try to do, our approach is to meet kids and families where they're at, right? Surround them by books in the places and that they are already showing up in. So we want anyone who works with kids and families in under-resourced communities to get access to abundance of books that then they can distribute to these families. And First Book membership is free to sign up, and you can be anything from an actual classroom teacher to a librarian, a social worker. We even work with barbershops and laundromats, and really any place that you can find kids and families hanging out, waiting around. How can we get books into all these places? That's one of our main goals. And we know that based on all our research, we know that even just giving them to classroom teachers, we know that 68% of our First Book members that get books from us are sending them homes to kids. So they're not just always keeping them in the classroom or keeping them where they're at, but they're also allowing kids to take them home and keep them for their very own, which we find to be really rewarding for the kids. Often it's the first book they've ever owned, the first brand new anything they've ever owned. So our membership is very focused on also getting books directly into the homes. We also at First Book, and I'm sure everyone here knows how much teachers spend out of pocket on books for their kids every year. So we do a lot of work with corporate partners and donors to try to get as much funding to these teachers as possible so that we can increase the number of books out the door. I want to talk about the Diverse Books Coalition real quickly too, which is something really cool that First Book started a little bit ago. And I know a lot of people that are on the coalition are actually in this room with us right now. So First Book has helped establish the Diverse Books for All Coalition, which involves 60 different organizations that leverage the power. So we're leveraging the power of nonprofits and member organizations to really increase book relevancy. And they've started by focusing on the needs of children ages 0 to 8 and have developed a really fantastic collective purchasing process that's resulted so far in distributing 145 diverse books to the kids and families that need them most. So that's really fantastic. And then I think the last thing I'll say, I don't want to take up too much time, but speaking to the importance of having books in all languages, another strategy that's really important for First Book is to broaden access to bilingual books in a wide variety of languages. So we recently surveyed our network we asked them, what titles do you want on the marketplace in languages other than English that we don't have for you? And then we worked with the publisher Barefoot Books to add bilingual titles that are available in 19 different languages to the marketplace. So these are everything from board books. They're for ages 0 to 3. They often support 2-gen and 3-gen learning once they get into the home. So it's especially helpful for these families where parents or grandparents' home language is something other than English. So those are just a few of the really important ways that we're trying to promote this work.
Thanks, Jules. And so as we're thinking about access, I also want us to think and ground ourselves in equity too. And so Rebecca S., can you share some of the, I mean, you already started in your opening remarks, but can you dive a little bit deeper in the work that you do?
Yeah. Oh, I'm so sorry. Here it comes. Apologies, everyone. I'm have a lingering cough. I just want to talk about just an issue that, you know, we are here during Banned Books Week, October 5th through the 11th. And I think when we talk about equity and access across the nation, and it was put into chat, and I know it's been mentioned already, but book bans and book challenges are happening across school districts and in libraries all over the country, and it's happening at legislative levels in some states more than others, right? And the access that some children are getting to books that are about various identities, lived experiences, family structures, about history, in some states, in some locations versus in other states and locations, is going to create two different perspectives on the world, and as kids grow up and have more and more limited access. And I think that is something that we need to really sit with and ponder when we think about access in public libraries, when we think about access in our schools, which is why I think the work that all of you in your organizations are doing is so important about getting books into the hands of families, into the hands of caregivers, right? That we have to have more of a grassroots way of thinking about literacy, thinking about representation, and supporting that access at the caregiver level, at the family level, at the home level, because our systems are failing us, and we're not getting that support. It's not going to be happening for some locations in our country. And so, PEN America is the one organization that is tracking book banning. And in the 2023 to 2024 school year, they recorded 10,046 instances of book bans, and actual book bans. And then the American Library Association, right? They're also looking at how pressure groups and government entities are actually they've initiated 72% demands to censor books in school and public libraries. And there's, also underreporting and censorship by exclusion, which are book challenges, or that educators are and librarians are afraid to put books out there or have books in their classrooms or in their libraries, so they just don't even have them. So that's kind of self-censorship. And then of course the legislative restrictions. And so, and the authors in the books that are most targeted are most frequently female, people of color, and or LGBTQ+ individuals. I know that in our curriculum, that is absolutely true. the books that we that are most challenged in our curriculum, and that we have to offer the most support to our schools and educators when they use our curriculums are the LGBTQ plus, particularly the gender identity books. And now with the Supreme Court case, Mahmoud versus Taylor, that is actually a case that sets a precedent, allowing caregivers to opt out of any LGBTQ plus books, right? That there is, we've actually had to create some language to support our schools and educators so that they don't get sued. But now there's actually precedent in the Supreme Court. So when we think about equity, access, and who is exposed even allowed in our schools and public libraries, if that's a real concern. And again, I think that is why making sure that families, caregivers, communities have those resources, but also have a voice, because I think the voices are coming from some populations, but aren't representative of the vast majority of people who actually value identity affirming resources for children.
Thanks, Rebecca. And as you say all of that, and as we think about Banned Book Week and how you grounded us so beautifully earlier on identity, and I know many of you have already spoken to this around books and the power to be windows and mirrors. I was wondering if folks wanted to address that and just dive a little bit deeper on identity and belonging and how books offer those windows and those mirrors for us. Maybe Tabitha, do you want to go in?
Yeah, I mean, one of this, and I enjoy a very quick story. We were sitting in the family space, and a family had came in, and they had the opportunity to get. They were a family in whom spoke Farsi, and we actually had a book in the back that that was in Farsi, and the mother was so excited to get that and to be able to actually connect and read in her language this book to their child. And if you think about not being able to really connect with your child in your language, in your home language, if we could not speak English and talk and read to our children and had to learn a new language just to have that bond with them, it would be, I couldn't even imagine it. And so I give that as a story of when people question why it matters, it is truly sharing a part of your culture, a part of yourself with your child, and it's a piece of your child's identity. And it's something that when we talk about belonging, that's belonging. That's understanding who you are and where you came from, and it not being in your language, and sometimes maybe in your language, but not by an author that looks like you, and not providing that cultural reference, is really, it's something that we can't imagine as English speakers. But I offer that as a way of people really thinking about, like, what would that be like for our children? And so we want to make sure that we're offering and providing access to those. The other part of that I will say is that in order to make those books accessible, they are so incredibly expensive. And I think that is the beauty, as Jules was saying, around the Diverse Book Coalition and a lot of the work that's being done of making sure that those books are are truly accessible and affordable for us to provide to families or for families to provide for themselves. And that is something that is like the goal is that we wouldn't have to be here. And as Rebecca, as it said, the systems are what have gotten us here. And so it's really the question of how do we sort of break those pieces to build back maybe what is what we need and what people need in order to be whole and happy and to be belonged.
Thanks, Tawith. I like how you lifted up systems. And so since you lifted up systems, what brings me to thinking about the continuum of birth through middle school and even beyond, because I know a lot of your organizations work all the way across the systems from healthcare, early childhood to K-12, and from birth all the way up through to high school. And so when we think about that and the work that you do, how can you just want to share some data that you've learned, or what might you want to share about that continuum of working across the age range? So Rebecca C.
Thanks, Michelle, for lifting that up. Before I start on that, I just wanted to piggyback on something that Tobias mentioned in, elevating access for children's books and diverse books is also elevating, and she mentioned the creators of those books, but I also often think of the publishers and finding these authentic publishers that work with people, work with creators to create these beautiful books in the different languages from the different cultures. And for Raising a Reader, that's one of the really important things that we do is making sure that we're working with those mom and pop publishers that have access to our authors and illustrators, our creators. And just address, so that's part of the system for us is the accessibility, the affordability, elevating those publishers and creators. But to your specific question, Michelle, as we think about the continuum from birth to middle grade, Raising a Reader, we serve children from ages birth through age 8. So we're not quite in that middle grade space. But what we know that, we're rooted in strengthening family engagement from birth all the way through second grade. And that's helping lay the foundation for children to become confident, motivated learners. The continuum that we focus on is based on two strategies, building those early literacy habits and reading routine, having children associate reading with a pleasurable experience. And what better way to associate reading with a pleasurable experience than cuddling up with my caregiver who I trust and opening a book with a title that looks like me, with a character that looks like me, with a language that might be mine. This really affirms the identity and opens windows into maybe others' experiences and those things that we know affects brain development and affects learning. We know positive emotional relationships and secure relationships that helps with the neural development, and it really influences the architecture of how children are learning, the architecture of their brains, while alternately negative experiences disrupt that brain growth and development. As we have children who get older, the cultural relevant books really helps with this concept of disruption. When they don't have cultural relevant books, they struggle to get through that content sometimes, whereas alternately, they have cultural responsive education, cultural responsive texts. We're seeing less children who are motivated, engaged, they have higher attendance at school, they're less distressed, they achieve higher test scores and complete school at higher rates. So there's a lot of research around cultural relevancy that begins with this access to abundant books.
We have time for one more comment on this continuum of birth through middle school. Does anyone else want to add to that? Rebecca S.
So a few things, just to piggyback on what Rebecca was talking about with brain development. And the fact of the matter is that children, none of us can learn and grow when we don't feel belonging. And belonging is a basic human need. It is a human right. And when we don't see ourselves reflected positively in the world, we can't. We are in amygdala, we talk about it as amygdala hijack, right? That fight, flight, freeze response. And when we are seeing negative representations of ourselves continually in the world, fight, flight, freeze. And that is what is happening. So many kids are coming into classrooms in a trauma response. And it's an identity-based trauma response because they're not being seen, heard, and valued in the world, and then they don't see themselves in the curriculum. And I think that's really important because it's the diverse representation is not just building those positive neurons and pathways, but is also creating a foundation for learning and literacy. That's really important because our brains are able to actually get into our prefrontal cortex so that we can actually learn and grow. And what happens is we get into middle school, as we get into adolescence, and that our peers start to influence our decisions and our, we think about the peer pressure as being negative, but actually, and Embrace Race did this great ages and stages guide that we can link and share out. But we talk about actually that adolescents actually are more prone to positive peer pressure because around inclusivity and wanting to make positive change than they are about negative peer pressure. So adolescents are rife for the opportunity to provide them with positive resources where they can see themselves, where they can see models for interrupting bias and discrimination, and yet that's not the models that are being provided for them. And so I think it's an opportunity for, through books and literature and representation to support what's already naturally being developed for adolescents in their brains. So
Thank you. I appreciate bringing it back to the science too, to the science of it all. So now, as we begin to wrap up this discussion, I want to turn to something that's at the heart of all this. And I really appreciate Cinnamon for bringing this up when I was talking to her in a prep conversation. And it really is about joy. So as we think about how reading for pleasure is on the decline, even among young children, this makes our work even more urgent. So can you talk to us about joy and how the work that you do is fostering this love of reading, this joyful act of reading? So Cinnamon, can you kick us off there?
Yeah, for sure. Also, before I say anything about that, Rebecca, that's Embrace Race is such a great resource. So I really highly recommend, if you're interested in anything around that, please check them out. But in terms of joy, we actually recently went through a curriculum revision to make sure we were aligned to the research and doing the right thing for children and educators. And what we start with every session, every community we work with, is the joy of sharing books, print motivation, children wanting to use books as a resource to learn more information. And that goes a few ways. So we know that when we talk to parents about reading or writing, even writing, learning how to write, there's a lot of less than positive experiences that adults have with reading. Often, it wasn't my experience, but I know for some adults, reading was what you did when you got in trouble, when an adult needed you to go somewhere else. So when reading is phrased as a punishment and not this beautiful space of opportunity for you to learn about the world around you, learn about yourself, learn about the way you think, it really is a struggle. So we not only are combating children and technology and all the things, we're also working with parents who have some maybe less than positive experiences with reading or writing, because writing is crucial to learning how to read, and also educators who are kind of struggling to build a lesson plan or a structure of a day. And these kiddos are new and they haven't been in childcare spaces or learning spaces, and they can't sit and listen for a story, and they kind of give up and feel like, well, they're not listening, they're not doing the thing, and they've lost their joy for sharing books with children. So it's not just that the children don't have the joy of reading books, it's that the adults in their lives maybe have some challenges with their own experiences with books or how they share books with children in a joyful way. So one of the things that we focus on at Make Way for Books is being silly, is bringing the joy back into reading. Like, books are supposed to be silly when you're 5. They're supposed to say silly words and make you giggle and want to run around your classroom and point out different things in the world and make you shout out how you went to the zoo with your mom that weekend. We want children to feel themselves in books, not just their identity, but their day-to-day experiences. I eat pancakes with my mom. I'm so excited to read this book. Or I want to read this book before nap time because it's the book my grandma reads to me at night. Like, there's all these beautiful community connections, and the community connections children have aren't just with the parents or their teachers. They're with their tios, their grandmas, their cousins, all these people in their lives and their communities. And we just want to make sure that books hold the joy that every book has. I know that everybody in this call probably has a book that they're thinking about when I'm talking about this joyful experience. But we want to make sure that the children we work with also have that feeling when they get to their 30s or whatever age you're at, and they're in a Zoom call talking about books. So
Thank you, Cinnamon. You really exude that joy. And I do encourage folks to put that book in the chat. I think it'd be fun to see what books bring you joy. So if you could put them in the chat, we'd love to have that list. And before we head to Q&A, because I do want to have some time for Q&A, I would love for each of you all to share a story of how abundant representative books have made a difference for a child or a family in your community. And I'll just, Cinnamon, since you're already there, can you start?
yeah, actually, it's something that a staff person of mine said to me in our group chat, and she talked about an educator who was working in a classroom, and that we give out these beautiful books. One of the books is called Don't Hug Doug, and Don't Hug Doug is about a little kid named Doug who doesn't like hugs. He likes other things, but hugs not really his jam. I get it. Sometimes I don't want to hug too. And the educator was actually really excited to get that book because her colleague had just come back from a really a sensitive surgery, and she was worried about how she was going to tell the children how to be gentle with the other educator in the room. And they read this book and they talked about being gentle with each other and how we can support one another while maybe not giving like bear hugs, but also support this educator that they love. And that's one of the beautiful things about Make Way for Books is we get to go in the community, in the classrooms with families and give these beautiful books and then hear the stories about how, oh my gosh, this book made a difference in our child's life, or it really helped when we went on vacation, or some experience that children are having. And that one is a very fresh one in my mind and really warmed my heart. So I hope it warms up their hearts today.
My heart is warm. My heart is warm. Rebecca C.
Just one story is really difficult, and Michelle Hyman knows that more than anyone. But you know, we recently, in the past 5 years, have started working with Tribal Child Care of California, and as you know, tribal communities are very much underrepresented in our storybooks. I think less than 1% of children's books published have a protagonist that is Native American. And so we worked with them with their culture committee to select 4 beautiful books to go into one of our summer programs. And what we heard after these programs went to family childcare providers throughout the state of California and ultimately to families was that the kiddos were going into the back of the books because several tribal communities were represented at the end, and they were looking into the back matter to make sure that they were represented in those stories. We often hear, you know, that we've provided a puppet that's resonant with many of the tribal communities in California, and how families were doing storytelling. So it's not just about sharing books for us, it's about storytelling and the rich vocabulary that comes with it. And when you hear stories like that, when children have not seen their cultures before or see it for the first time, and they see that this is me, those are those stories that get you through every workday, and the long hours, and we're ultimately trying to work ourselves out of a job right now, and we have a long way to go, but I'm proud of how far we've come.
Thanks, Rebecca. Tabitha.
Thank you. So one of the things, one of my favorite times of the year is Books on Break, where we get to go into the schools and we have we take over the library, and we have books, tons of books in the library for kids to grab 10 going into the summer. And we have a string backpack we hand to the kids, and they get to choose 10 books to actually go through and pick them out. And so we had a child who was on the floor there putting her books inside of her string backpack. And I looked at the books and I grabbed one, and I happened to notice she had a name tag on and it said Bana. And I looked at the books that I was picking up and it said, "My name is Bana." And I was like, "It's your name." And this little girl clung hold of the book in this way of like cherishing it. And so, as a person who rarely sees her name on a keychain or in those different things that Jeanette, a lot more popular names are on, it was really beautiful to see her, and she almost looked like the girl who wrote it. And it was just so beautiful to see her culture be seen in this book with her name.
I love that. Jules.
Yeah, one story is hard. So I've been conducting research with First Books membership for about 15 years now. And so I've read like tons of both heartbreaking and heartwarming stories around this topic. But actually, my answer for this question comes from some volunteering that I do. So I've been volunteering for a really awesome local DC program called the Homeless Children's Playtime Project. And really their goal is to just provide kids in transitional housing with a safe and supportive environment to just play and enjoy themselves. And I've been working with them for about 13 years. And I've had the pleasure of sitting down and reading with kids, so many kids ages 1 to 10. And I've personally seen how much more kids want to read when they can, one, choose their book, and two, be able to choose a book with a character that feels like a reflection of themselves or their friends or their families. So I've actually seen reading become play for these kids. They get there to just play for 2 hours, and they are choosing to read when the right books are put in front of them. So my quick little story.
Reading is play, for sure. Rebecca S., we'll wrap it up with you.
One of the teachers that we work with shared a story about a book in our curriculum that's Dina Misses Her Mom by Jessie Helms and Kalia Ruffin, which is a book depicting a child with a recently incarcerated mother. And that's an experience that is really underrepresented in children's literature. Even though 1 in 28 children have lived with an incarcerated parent. And so she shared this book with her 2nd grade class. And then during the discussion, she learned that several students had personal experiences with an incarcerated family member. And, the lesson was, created an open, non-judgmental space, and students really felt empowered to kind of share their stories. It reduced the stigma around family children with incarcerated family members. And what she noticed then is that actually student engagement increased in her classroom because they were able to really build those relationships and feel more connected with each other and feel more seen without the judgment, just from the one book where they got to share more about who they were. So
thank you all. I'm sorry I limited you all to one, but I really appreciate you sharing your stories. They really did warm my heart. And now we'll turn it over to the group for some of your questions. I know we were answering some questions all along, but let me see here. How about, do any of your organizations speak with families and educators about the need for guidelines around screen time in this time of abundant screens in early childhood, and how you balance that with the power of books? Cinnamon?
Yeah, so I didn't highlight it yet, but Make Way for Books has an early literacy app. It's fully bilingual, it's fully free, it's really great. Download the app. And also the way we talk about the app, because books are on the app and they're on the app in the way that we present books, like physical books, to families. So we talk about books in a 3-read kind of structure, because we know the importance of rereading books. It's not just I got this Piggy and Gerald book and I'm going to read it once and then never come back to it. It's that we have to come back to textbooks. But the app talks about the 3 reading structures as a crucial connection to the adult in the child's life. So we talk about that screen time is not really for children. Like the app is on a phone or a screen. However, the tool is the adult in their life. So if you're using digital resources, it's supposed to be for the adult in the life of the child to support the knowledge gain that happens using that educational resource. So that's how Make Way for Books talks about it.
Thanks, Cinnamon. Anyone else want to chime in on that one specifically? No. No. Okay. Here's one. As your organization promotes access to diverse books, where do you get your books from? So what are some vendors for quality bilingual and diverse books that you might suggest?
I can start this one. So as I mentioned earlier, I really recommend looking at some of the smaller publishing houses, as they really work with authentic creators. So several that we work with are Lee and Low Books, Barefoot Books, Starbright, Child's Play, Language Lizard, Arte Publico Press. I'm going to miss out so many that I really love. Platypus Media has been one lately, Blue Dot Press, and I will pass the baton to someone else who can keep this list going.
Well, Make Way for Books definitely uses First Book, so I'll definitely shout out First Book. Little Libros Canticos. Selena Book Press is an Indigenous book press. I highly suggest, if you're going to purchase Indigenous books, purchase them from Indigenous Footprints, because they really need our support.
And we can have this list, we'll put this list in the follow-up materials that go out to the group to all registrants on Friday. Someone asked a question about resources about how beneficial it is to read to babies. Can someone share that? Like, what are some resources and why is it beneficial to read to babies?
I
Do I
can do that. Brain development, the majority, 80% of your brain development is happening before age, within your first 5 years, 3 to 5 years. And one of the ways, and we have our Book Babies programs, which is a literacy coaching, home visiting program, and they work with families from birth all the way to 5. And it really is, when we talk about ages and stages, it's growing. It's the reason why a lot of pediatricians are saying, your pediatricians are saying and handing out books to children is hugely because the brain and language development is happening. So even if it's not reading, it's talking to your child, singing to your child, making sure that they're hearing language in order to start forming those parts of their brain that is shooting off and developing within those first 5 years of their life and beyond. And so it not only does that, but the actual bond that's created from a social emotional aspect is super important for a child. And there's tons of research in which know several of us on the stream could go down the list of it, but realizing the time, I open it up to the group because it is something I could potentially filibuster on.
Well, we are coming close to time. That went by fast. So before we wrap, can I ask you all maybe 30 seconds to share what brings you hope or what is hopeful for you as we think about the future of book abundance and its role in early learning? 30 seconds or less. Cinnamon. I'll start. You're in my top left, so.
And that was my look off to the side, what would I say?
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. I think the exciting thing is that more people know that they can create books, that we have more unique authors, and that they're not just coming from specific publishing houses, and that more voices will be shared in new books for children and young adults.
Thanks, Cinnamon. Jules?
Yeah, I'm honestly, what makes me most hopeful is just all of us in this room right now, knowing that there are so many great individuals and organizations supporting this work. I'm so thrilled to see everyone joining. It's just, as someone whose topic this is so important to, it's good to know that there are others out there working towards the same cause. We're not alone. We've all got this. We'll chip away at it and get where we need to be.
Rebecca S.
I think the fact that there are so many diverse books around such a wide variety of identities, lived experiences, family structures. I mean, just thinking about gender identity, when I first started at Amazeworks 6 years ago, it was a lot of animals wearing different dresses, right? And there's a lot to choose from now that are from authentic voice and lived experience, and there's just so many amazing authors and illustrators and that are being published, and representation is out there, and we just need to continue to uplift and provide access for these great books for children. So
Thanks, Rebecca. Tabitha.
I would have to say that the sort of twofold term, the parents give me hope. Watching parents truly engage, and it's not us empowering parents because they already have it. And it's just like with educators and others, it's how much support can we provide and help to do the work that they do in an even more beautiful way. And I think all of us on the screen, whether it be parents or to educators or to kids directly, are all working to ensure that we're providing the tools that's needed for them to do the amazing things they already are capable of doing.
Love that. As a parent, I love that you shared that. Rebecca C.
Thanks, Michelle. I think we've come a long way in the publishing world in general. It's not an anomaly anymore to be able to find a publisher who is using authentic creators for those books. So that gives me a lot of hope that I don't have to struggle to find titles for my program who is hosting Burmese refugees or bilingual families who are bilingual, and the ability to have access to all of those great, beautiful stories to provide for families. So that gives me a lot of hope. We've come a long way. We have a long way to go, but I see us moving in the direction that we need to be as a country.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone. I see we're coming close to the end here. But one of the things that I loved about this session is that we talked about joy and abundance and hope. So, as we start to wrap the conversation, really thinking about book abundance is not just about numbers. It's really about the stories that fuel imagination, affirm identity, and build strong reading foundations. So in this session that we held during National Book Month and Banned Books Week, we've heard powerful reminders that when children grow up surrounded by books that reflect who they are and open the doors to the wider world, they are better prepared to thrive in school and in life. So before we sign off completely, hope you'll all take a look at the slide here with some of our upcoming webinars and join us in the upcoming weeks. So on behalf of the CGLR, the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, thank you to our panelists and to all of you for joining us. Please do take the time to complete the poll and stay tuned for other sessions. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you, everybody. Bye.